Brinley Armstrong, 28, stood frozen at the altar as her mother's words echoed in her ears. "We're passing the car his parents gave us as your wedding gift," she had whispered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. In that moment, the elaborate wedding around Brinley, the flowers, the music, the gathered guests seemed to fade away. She knew instantly that this wasn't just about a car. The look in her mother's eyes revealed a decades-old secret that would unravel everything Brinley thought she knew about her family. Hey everyone, before I dive deeper into the most shocking day of my life, I'd love to know where you're watching from. If this family drama already has you hooked, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about family secrets and sweet, sweet justice. Trust me, what happens after my mom dropped this bombshell at my wedding will leave you speechless. Now, let's rewind 6 months before my wedding day. The spring afternoon when Connor proposed was picture perfect. We were hiking at Sequoia National Park, his favorite spot since childhood, and when he dropped to one knee at sunset, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Connor Reynolds was everything I'd ever wanted, kind, ambitious, and from a family that seemed to radiate warmth. After dating for 3 years, I felt I knew everything about him. "Your parents are going to be thrilled," Connor said, as we drove back to Los Angeles, my engagement ring catching the last rays of sunlight. I nodded, picturing my mom's reaction. Diana Armstrong was a force of nature, the type of woman who commanded attention in any room. My father, James, was her perfect complement, quiet, thoughtful, and unfailingly supportive. They'd been married for 30 years and were still deeply in love. At least that's what I'd always believed. When we arrived at my parents' suburban home to share our news, my mother's reaction was oddly subdued. She hugged me tightly, of course, and admired the ring, but something flickered behind her eyes, something I couldn't identify. "We should celebrate with the Reynolds family soon," my father suggested, his arm around my mother's waist. "Maybe that dinner at Rosewood they've been suggesting." My mother stiffened slightly. "Of course," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We should get to know Connor's parents better." That night, as Connor and I lay in bed, planning our future, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with my mother. But I dismissed it as wedding jitters. After all, I was her only daughter. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of venue visits, cake tastings, and dress fittings. My mother threw herself into wedding planning with unexpected enthusiasm, insisting on handling all communication with Connor's parents, Harold and Elaine Reynolds. They were old money from Boston, polite but reserved, and had offered to contribute generously to the wedding. "I've got this, honey," my mother would say whenever I suggested joining her meetings with Elaine. "You focus on your work. I'll handle the Reynolds." I was grateful for her help, especially since my job as a pediatric nurse left me with little free time, but occasionally I'd catch her staring at photos of Connor's family with an intensity that seemed out of place. One evening, I came home early to find my mother alone in the kitchen, a glass of wine in hand, studying old photo albums. When she saw me, she quickly closed them. "Mom, is everything okay?" I asked, setting my bag down. "Of course, sweetie," she replied, but her smile seemed forced, just feeling nostalgic with my baby getting married. I sat beside her and reached for the album. "Show me what you were looking at." Reluctantly, she opened the album to reveal photos from before I was born, my parents in their early 20s standing on a beach I didn't recognize. "Where was this?" I asked. "Cape Cod," she replied, her finger tracing the outline of my father's younger face. "The summer before we got married." "You look so happy," I observed. "We were," she said, and then added quietly, "Things were simpler then." "What do you mean?" She shook her head and closed the album. "Nothing important." Just reminiscing about a time before mortgages and responsibilities, she stood abruptly. "Have you decided on your bridesmaids' dresses yet?" The subject change was obvious, but I let it go. Wedding planning continued, and 3 months before the big day, both families gathered at Rosewood for dinner. It was the first time our parents had met in the same room, though they'd been communicating through my mother about wedding details. The tension was palpable from the moment the Reynolds arrived. Harold Reynolds, tall and distinguished with salt and pepper hair, extended his hand to my father with cool politeness. But when he turned to my mother, something strange happened. He froze just for a second before composing himself. "Diana," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "it's been a long time." My mother's smile was equally practiced. "Indeed, it has, Harold." Elaine Reynolds, petite and elegant in pearls, glanced between them with a tightness around her eyes. My father seemed oblivious, already discussing golf with Connor's younger brother. "You two have met before," Connor asked, squeezing my hand under the table. "A lifetime ago," my mother replied dismissively. "Boston is smaller than people think." The dinner proceeded with superficial pleasantries, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening beneath the surface. Every time my mother and Harold spoke, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken history. After dessert, when Connor and I stepped away to speak with the sommelier about wedding wines, I returned to find my mother and Elaine in what appeared to be a tense conversation by the restrooms. "No need to let it go, Diana," Elaine was saying, her voice low but firm. "It was 30 years ago." "Some things can't be forgotten," my mother replied, her smile brittle. "But don't worry, I won't ruin their happiness with ancient history." They separated quickly when they saw me approaching. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just discussing the rehearsal dinner," my mother said smoothly. "Elaine has some wonderful ideas." That night I asked Connor if he knew of any connection between our parents. He shook his head. "Dad went to Harvard, then moved to Boston proper." "Your mom grew up in Pennsylvania, right?" "I don't see how they would have crossed paths." "Maybe they're just naturally awkward people," I suggested, trying to laugh it off. But the seed of curiosity had been planted. As the wedding date approached, the strange interactions multiplied. My mother insisted on handling all financial discussions, with the Reynolds vetoing their offer to pay for the honeymoon, with an insistence that surprised even my father. "Diana, they're trying to be generous," he argued one night, when they thought I couldn't hear. "Why are you making this so difficult? You don't understand, James," she replied, her voice tight. "I won't be indebted to Harold Reynolds. Not again." "What does that mean?" my father asked, confusion evident in his tone. There was a long pause before my mother replied, "Nothing. Just wedding stress talking." 2 months before the wedding, Connor's parents surprised us by offering a brand new luxury car as our wedding gift. The gesture was incredibly generous, but my mother's reaction was bizarre. "Absolutely not," she said, her voice ice cold when I told her. "We can't accept that." "Mom, it's an incredibly generous gift," I argued. "Why would we refuse it?" "Because nothing from the Reynolds comes without strings attached," she snapped, then immediately looked regretful. "I'm sorry, honey. I just think it's too extravagant. Your father and I would prefer to help you with a down payment on a house instead." 1 month before my wedding, I was helping my father clean out the attic when I found a dusty shoebox tucked behind Christmas decorations. Inside were letters, photographs, and mementos I'd never seen before. "Dad, what's this?" I called out, holding up a photograph that made my heart stop. My father looked over and froze. The picture showed my mother much younger, her arm around a man who was unmistakably Harold Reynolds. They were standing on a beach looking into each other's eyes with unmistakable intimacy. The back of the photo was dated August 1994, a year before I was born. "Where did you find that?" my father asked, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "In this box," I replied, already rifling through more photos. Each one showed my mother and Connor's father together at parties on what looked like dates, even one where they were kissing. "Dad, what is this? Were Mom and Harold together?" My father sighed heavily, sitting down on an old trunk. For a moment, he looked older than I'd ever seen him. "Your mother should be the one to tell you this." "Tell me what?" My voice rose with anxiety. "Dad, please." He rubbed his face with both hands. They were engaged, Brinley. Before your mother met me, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Engaged. But why didn't anyone say anything when Connor and I started dating? It was a long time ago, my father said quietly, and Boston is a big city. We never expected your paths to cross with the Reynolds family. But once they did, once you realized who Connor's parents were, why keep it secret? I demanded, feeling sick to my stomach. My father looked away. There's more to the story than I know. Diana never talks about that time in her life. All I know is that it ended badly and she was deeply hurt. When you brought Connor home that first time and mentioned his last name, I saw her face. She recognized it immediately, but she decided not to say anything. So we've all been pretending. Through all these months of wedding planning, I felt a surge of anger. Does Connor know? Do his parents know that I'm in the dark? I don't know what Harold and Elaine have told Connor, my father admitted, but your mother made me promise not to bring it up. She said the past should stay in the past. I clutched the photographs tightly. There's something else, isn't there? Something you're not telling me. My father stood, taking the photos gently from my hands. You need to talk to your mother, Brinley. This isn't my story to tell. I stormed downstairs, finding my mother in the kitchen, preparing dinner. When she saw my face, she knew immediately. What's wrong? She asked, setting down her knife. You were engaged to Harold Reynolds, I said flatly, Connor's father. Were you ever going to tell me? The color drained from her face. Who told you that I found the photographs in the attic? Dad confirmed it. I crossed my arms. Why would you keep this from me, from Connor? We've been planning this wedding for months, while you've been harboring some secret grudge against his family. My mother sank into a chair, her hands trembling slightly. It was over long before you were born, Brinley. I didn't see how it was relevant. Not relevant, I laughed incredulously. Mom, the awkward dinners, the tension, the way you've been controlling every interaction with the Reynolds, it's affected everything about this wedding. She looked down at her hands. I was trying to protect you. From what I demanded. From the truth about what kind of man Harold Reynolds really is, she replied, her voice hardening. Which is what exactly? My mother looked up at me, her eyes suddenly filled with tears. He left me at the altar, Brinley. We had a wedding planned, everything paid for, and the night before he sent his brother to tell me he couldn't go through with it, he never even had the courage to tell me himself. I sat down heavily across from her. That's awful, Mom. I'm so sorry that happened to you. But that was 30 years ago. There's more, she whispered. I was pregnant. The world seemed to stop spinning. I was 8 weeks pregnant when he abandoned me, she continued, tears flowing freely now. I was alone, humiliated, and carrying his child. What happened to the baby? I asked, my voice barely audible. My mother wiped her tears, looking straight into my eyes. I miscarried a week later. The stress, the heartbreak, my body couldn't handle it. After that, I left Boston. I couldn't bear to stay in a city where everyone knew what had happened to me. I moved to Pennsylvania, met your father 6 months later, and the rest is history. Does Harold know about the pregnancy? The miscarriage? She shook her head. I never told him. He gave up the right to know when he sent his brother to break up with me. I tried to process this information. So all these months you've been playing nice with the family of the man who broke your heart and abandoned you when you were pregnant. For you, she said simply, because you love Connor and he's nothing like his father. I would never punish you for Harold's mistakes. But the car, I said, suddenly remembering, why were you so against accepting their gift? A strange expression crossed my mother's face. Because 30 years ago, Harold's parents offered me money to disappear from his life. They thought I wasn't good enough for their son. I came from a middle-class family, worked my way through college. They wanted Harold to marry someone from their social circle. Her laugh was bitter. Apparently, Elaine fit the bill perfectly. They were engaged 6 months after he left me. My head was spinning. Have you told Dad all of this? She nodded. He knows everything. Your father is a good man, Brinley. The kind of man who loved me despite my broken heart and helped me build a new life. I thought about Connor, about how different he was from the cold, calculating man my mother was describing. I need to tell Connor, I said finally. My mother reached across the table for my hand. Are you sure that's wise? It was a long time ago. I can't marry him with this secret between us, I insisted. He deserves to know why there's been tension between our families. She squeezed my hand. I understand. Just be gentle. Remember that this isn't Connor's fault. That night I called Connor and asked him to meet me at our favorite coffee shop. As I waited for him, I rehearsed what I would say, how I would explain this tangled history without making him feel responsible for his father's actions. When he arrived, his smile faded as he saw my serious expression. What's wrong? He asked, sliding into the booth across from me. I took a deep breath. I found out something today about our parents, something they've been keeping from us. What do you mean? Connor asked, his brow furrowed with concern as he reached for my hands across the coffee shop table. I took a deep breath. Your father and my mother were engaged before she met my dad. Connor's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. That's impossible. My father met my mother at Harvard. They've been together since their junior year. No, Connor. Before your mom, there was mine. I pulled out one of the photographs I'd taken from the shoebox, the one of them at the beach. This is from 1994. He stared at the photograph, his face paling. I don't understand. Why would they hide this from us? Because it ended badly, I explained gently. My mom was left at the altar. She was pregnant, Connor. She lost the baby after your dad abandoned her. Connor recoiled as if I'd slapped him. That can't be true. My father wouldn't. He's not. He shook his head vehemently. There must be some explanation. My father is the most honorable man I know. I'm just telling you what my mother told me. I said, hurt by his immediate defense of his father. She has photographs, Connor, letters. It happened. He stood abruptly. I need to talk to my parents. Now. Connor, wait, but he was already heading for the door, leaving me sitting alone with the photograph and a cold cup of coffee. For 3 days, I heard nothing from Connor. My calls went unanswered, my texts unread. I fluctuated between anger and despair, wondering if our relationship was ending before our marriage had even begun. My mother watched me with worried eyes, but said nothing, clearly regretting having shared her past. Finally, on the 4th day, Connor showed up at my apartment. He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes and a haunted expression I'd never seen before. I talked to my parents, he said without preamble as I let him in. It's all true. And worse. I guided him to the couch where he sank down heavily. What do you mean, worse? Connor rubbed his face with both hands. My father admitted everything. The engagement to your mother, the pregnancy he claims he didn't know about. His voice hardened, but then he tried to justify it. Said he was young, pressured by his parents. Said your mother wasn't suitable for the family legacy. Suitable, I repeated, anger flaring. His words, not mine, Connor clarified quickly. I've never seen my mother so upset. Apparently, she knew about Diana, your mom, but not about the pregnancy. She kept saying, You told me she ended it, Harold. You told me she changed her mind. He shook his head in disgust. It was all lies. My father lied to my mother for their entire marriage. I sat beside him processing this information. What about the car? Did they explain why my mom was so against accepting it? Connor's laugh was hollow. Oh, that was the best part. Turns out my grandparents, my father's parents, offered your mother $10,000 to leave Boston and never contact my father again. She refused, of course. But after she left anyway, they bought my father a car as a consolation gift for his broken engagement. The same model they're offering us, just 30 years newer. That's sick, I whispered. It gets worse, Connor continued, his voice dropping. My father admitted that he knew exactly what he was doing when he proposed we receive a car as our wedding gift. He said he thought it would be poetic justice, his words, to give your mother's daughter the gift she indirectly paid for with her pain. His eyes filled with tears. I don't know who this man is, Brinley. I feel like my entire childhood was a lie. I moved closer, wrapping my arms around him. I'm so sorry, Connor. He buried his face in my shoulder. I told them I needed time to think. I left the house and haven't been back. I've been staying with my brother, trying to figure out what to do. About the wedding, I asked, fear gripping my heart. Connor pulled back, looking into my eyes with intensity. No. About my relationship with my parents. The wedding is the only thing I'm sure about. He took my hands. I love you, Brinley. None of this changes how I feel about you. If anything, it makes me more determined to be nothing like my father. Relief flooded through me. I love you too. But what are we going to do about the wedding? Our families can barely be in the same room together, and now all of this is out in the open. Connor was quiet for a moment. I think we need to have a family dinner. All of us together. Clear the air once and for all. The idea terrified me. Do you really think that's a good idea? No, he admitted. But I think it's necessary. 30 years of secrets and resentment need to end if we're going to have any chance at a peaceful wedding or a future where our families don't tear each other apart. Reluctantly, I agreed. We arranged for both families to meet at a private dining room in a neutral restaurant. The tension as we all took our seats was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother sat rigidly beside my father, who kept a protective arm around her shoulders. Across the table, Harold Reynolds looked like a man facing a firing squad, while Elaine's eyes were red-rimmed from crying. Connor stood commanding everyone's attention. We're here because the secrets of the past are threatening our future, he began. What happened 30 years ago between our parents has now affected all of us. But Brinley and I refuse to let your mistakes define our relationship. Harold cleared his throat. Son, I understand you're upset. No, Dad, you don't get to speak yet. Connor interrupted, his voice firm. First, you're going to listen to Diana to Mrs. Armstrong because she deserves to be heard after 30 years of silence. All eyes turned to my mother, who seemed momentarily startled before straightening her shoulders. I never planned to bring this up. She began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. When Brinley brought Connor home and I realized whose son he was, I decided the past should stay buried. Not for your sake, Harold, she added, looking directly at Connor's father, but for our children's. But the car, Harold began. Was a cruel joke, my mother finished. You knew exactly what you were doing, offering the same model your parents bought you after you broke my heart. You wanted me to know that you remembered that you still had the power to hurt me. Harold had the grace to look ashamed. It was petty, he admitted. I've regretted it since Connor confronted me. Regretted the car or regretted what you did to me 30 years ago, my mother pressed. Harold looked down at his hands. Both, he said quietly. I was a coward then, Diana. I let my parents dictate my life because I was afraid to lose my inheritance, my standing in society. By the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late. You were gone. And I was married to a man who would never abandon me, my mother replied, reaching for my father's hand. A man who has shown me what real love and commitment look like for 30 years. Elaine Reynolds spoke for the first time, her voice trembling. I want to apologize too, Diana. Harold told me he had been engaged before, but he said you ended it. I never knew. She glared at her husband. I never knew about the pregnancy, about his parents' interference. If I had. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. It wouldn't have changed anything, my mother said, not unkindly. We've all built lives we wouldn't trade. James and I have our beautiful daughter. You and Harold have Connor and Tyler. The past is the past. Then why are we here? Harold asked, sounding genuinely confused. Connor answered, because the past doesn't stay buried, Dad. It festers and poisons the present unless we acknowledge it and make amends. He turned to my mother. Mrs. Armstrong, I want you to know that I am nothing like my father was at my age. I will never abandon Brinley, never choose money or status over love, and I'm deeply sorry for the pain my family caused you. My mother's eyes softened. I know that, Connor. You remind me much more of James than of Harold. That's why I've never objected to this marriage despite everything. But you've been cold to my parents, Connor pointed out gently. Yes, my mother acknowledged, and that was wrong of me. I let old wounds dictate my behavior. For that, I apologize to both of you, she added, looking at Elaine and Harold. Our children's happiness should be more important than our ancient history. As the weeks counted down to the wedding day, an uneasy truce formed between our families. My mother and Elaine began meeting for lunch without either of their husbands present. After their third meeting, my mother returned home with a thoughtful expression. Elaine is not what I expected, she told me as we finalized the seating arrangements for the reception. All these years I've pictured her as this privileged society woman who stole my life. And she's not, I asked, surprised by my mother's conciliatory tone. No, my mother admitted. She's someone who was manipulated by the Reynolds family just like I was. The difference is that she stayed. She tapped her pen against the seating chart. She told me Harold was a different person in those early years of their marriage, cold, distant, like he was going through the motions. She considered leaving several times. What made her stay? She got pregnant with Connor, my mother explained, and something changed in Harold. He became devoted to her and to their sons in a way he never had been before. She thinks he was trying to atone for what he did to me without ever admitting it. I considered this information. Does that make you feel any better about what happened? My mother was quiet for a moment. It makes me realize that life is complicated and people are flawed. Harold made a terrible choice, but he spent 30 years living with it, raising good sons who are nothing like him at his worst. She smiled sadly, and in a strange way, his cowardice led me to your father to you. So I can't regret how things turned out even if I'll never forget the pain. The night before our wedding, both families gathered for the rehearsal dinner. The atmosphere was tense, but cordial, with everyone making a visible effort to be polite. As dinner concluded, Harold Reynolds stood and tapped his glass for attention. I'd like to say something. He began looking uncharacteristically nervous. Tomorrow, our families will be united through the marriage of our children. But before that happens, I need to make amends for the past. He turned to face my mother directly. Diana, 30 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life when I let you go. I was a coward who chose family expectations over love, and I've regretted it every day since. The room fell silent as Harold continued. I never knew about the baby, and for that, I am deeply sorry. No apology can undo the pain I caused, but I want you to know that I admire the life you've built, the daughter you've raised. James, he said, turning to my father, you are twice the man I was at that age. You deserve all the happiness you've found together. My father nodded, his arm tightening around my mother's shoulders. Harold reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. This doesn't change the past, but I hope it might help the future. He handed the envelope to me. Connor tells me you two have been saving for a house. This is a down payment, not a car, not a reminder of the past, but an investment in your future together. A future I hope will include both our families finding peace with each other. I opened the envelope to find a cashier's check for a substantial amount. Connor looked over my shoulder, his eyes widening. Dad, he began, his voice thick with emotion. It's not an attempt to buy forgiveness, Harold said quickly. It's simply a father trying to do right by his son and the woman he loves. He looked back at my mother. Something I should have done 30 years ago. The next day, my wedding day dawned bright and clear. As I prepared in the bridal suite surrounded by my bridesmaids, there was a knock at the door. My mother entered looking elegant in her mother-of-the-bride dress. "You look beautiful," she said, her eyes filling with tears as she took in my appearance. "Don't cry or you'll make me ruin my makeup," I warned, blinking back my own tears. My mother laughed, then grew serious. "I have something for you." She handed me a small velvet box. This was my mother's. "I was saving it for your wedding day." I opened the box to find a delicate pearl bracelet. "It's beautiful, Mom." "Something old," she said, helping me fasten it around my wrist. "And I have something else." She handed me a second smaller box. Inside was a pair of sapphire earrings I'd never seen before. "These are gorgeous," I gasped. "Are they new?" In a manner of speaking, my mother replied. "They're from Elaine." I looked up in surprise. "Connor's mother." My mother nodded. "She came to me yesterday. These were a gift from Harold on their wedding day. She said she couldn't wear them for years because they reminded her of the beginning of their marriage, which was difficult. But she kept them, and now she wants you to have them. She said they represent something borrowed, something blue, and a new beginning for both our families." I carefully put on the earrings, touched by the gesture. "That's unexpected." "Life is full of unexpected turns," my mother said, adjusting my veil. 30 years ago, if someone had told me I'd be helping my daughter prepare to marry Harold Reynolds' son, I would have thought they were crazy. But here we are. She squeezed my hands. "And I wouldn't change a thing because every step led to you finding Connor." As the ceremony approached, my father came to escort me to the altar. He whistled low when he saw me. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even prettier than Mom," I teased. "Tied with your mother," he amended with a smile. Then, more seriously, "Are you ready for this, Brinley?" After everything that's happened, I nodded confidently. "More than ready. Connor isn't his father, Dad. He's proven that over and over." "I know," my father replied. "He's a good man, just like you're an exceptional woman." He offered his arm. "Let's not keep him waiting." As we processed down the aisle, I saw Connor standing at the altar, his eyes fixed on me with such love that everything else faded away. Our families were seated in the front rows, my mother looking elegant and composed, Harold and Elaine Reynolds, watching with expressions that mingled joy and something like atonement. The ceremony proceeded beautifully until the moment came for the exchange of rings. As Connor slipped the wedding band onto my finger, my mother rose from her seat and approached the altar. This wasn't part of the planned ceremony, and a murmur of surprise rippled through the guests. She leaned in close to me and whispered just loud enough for Connor and me to hear. At my wedding, my mom smiled and said, "We're passing the car his parents gave as your wedding gift, but that's not all." She pressed something into my hand, a set of keys. "These are to our lake house. Your father and I want you to have it. A place where you can build memories untainted by the past." Tears filled my eyes as I hugged her tightly. "Thank you, Mom." She stepped back, wiping her own tears, and returned to her seat. The ceremony continued, but as I looked out at our assembled guests, the Reynolds and Armstrong families side by side, I realized something profound had shifted. The secrets that had threatened to tear us apart had instead forced us to confront the past, and in doing so had created an unexpected path toward healing. You know what, everyone? Life has a way of bringing hidden secrets to light when we least expect it. As my mom gave us that incredible gift of the lake house, where I spent so many happy summers as a child, I felt the weight of family history finally lifting. What about you? Have you ever experienced a moment where family tensions suddenly transformed into something beautiful? Let me know in the comments. We're about halfway through my story now, and trust me, you'll want to stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying this journey so far, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more family stories with unexpected twists. Now let's continue with what happened after the ceremony. The reception was in full swing by the time Connor and I completed our rounds of greeting guests. The ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel glittered with soft lighting and floral arrangements, while a jazz quartet played in the corner. Despite the tension leading up to the wedding, both families appeared to be making genuine efforts to get along. "Your mother and my mom are actually laughing together," Connor observed, nodding toward a table where Diana and Elaine sat with their heads close together. "If you'd told me a month ago that would happen, I wouldn't have believed it." I squeezed his hand. "People can surprise you." Speaking of surprises, Connor said, his expression growing serious. "I need to tell you something. I've been putting it off because I didn't want to add more drama before the wedding, but now that we're officially married." He guided me to a quiet corner away from the dance floor. "I found something in my father's study last week when I went home to collect my things." "What kind of something?" I asked, suddenly wary. Connor took a deep breath. "Letters from your mother to my father, dated after she left Boston. Letters he never opened." My heart sank. "How many?" 12, Connor replied. "Sent over the course of 3 months after she left, all still sealed." He pulled an envelope from inside his jacket. "I didn't open them either. They belong to your mother." I stared at the envelope containing 30-year-old secrets. "Did you tell your father you found them?" Connor nodded grimly. "He said he couldn't bear to read them at the time that he was trying to move forward with my mother and thought opening old wounds would make it impossible, so he just kept them. Never read them, never threw them away." "That's..." Cowardly Connor finished. "Again. My father seems to have a pattern." He handed me the envelope. "I think your mother should have these. It's her story to finish." I accepted the envelope with trembling hands. What if they change everything? What if she told him about the pregnancy in these letters? Then he's even more of a coward than I thought. Connor said, his jaw tight. "But it doesn't change us, Brinley. Nothing in those letters changes how I feel about you." I tucked the envelope into my wedding clutch. "I'll give them to her after the honeymoon. Today should be about our beginning, not their ending." Connor smiled, leaning in to kiss me softly. "I love your perspective. It's one of the million reasons I married you." Our moment was interrupted by the clinking of glass. Harold Reynolds was standing at the microphone, champagne in hand. The room quieted as he cleared his throat. "I'd like to propose a toast to the bride and groom," he began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "Connor, my son, you've chosen a remarkable woman to share your life with. Brinley, you are everything a father could hope for in a daughter-in-law, kind, intelligent, and strong enough to stand up for what matters." His eyes flickered briefly to Diana. "I hope you'll both forgive an old man for offering some advice. Never let pride stand in the way of love. Never choose what others expect over what your heart knows is right." I felt Connor stiffen beside me, recognizing his father's words for what they were, not just advice for us, but a public admission of his own failings. Harold continued, his voice growing more emotional. "The greatest regret of my life was letting someone go because I lacked the courage to fight for her. Don't make that mistake. Fight for each other every day." As applause filled the room, I glanced at my mother. She was watching Harold with an unreadable expression, my father's arm protectively around her shoulders. Later, as the dancing began, I was surprised to see Harold approach my mother, extending his hand in invitation. After a moment's hesitation, she accepted, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. They moved awkwardly at first, maintaining a respectful distance, but I could see them talking intently. "What do you think they're saying?" Connor asked, coming up beside me. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think they both needed this moment." When the song ended, my mother returned to my father, who welcomed her with a warm smile and a gentle kiss. Whatever had passed between her and Harold seemed to have brought her peace rather than distress. As the evening progressed, I found myself cornered by Elaine Reynolds while Connor was speaking with some college friends. "Brinley," she said, her voice soft but earnest, "I want you to know something." Harold was never the same after Diana left. He tried to be the husband and father his parents expected, but there was always something missing. She glanced across the room at her husband. "I think he spent 30 years paying for his mistake. That's a long time to carry regret," I observed. Elaine nodded. "Too long. Watching you and Connor, seeing how you've faced these revelations together, instead of running from them, it's shown both of us what could have been different." She touched my arm gently. "Thank you for bringing healing to our family, even if that was never your intention." As the reception drew to a close, Connor and I prepared to depart for our honeymoon. My parents stood at the entrance to the ballroom, my mother radiant, despite the emotional day. "Be happy," she whispered as she hugged me tightly. "That's all I've ever wanted for you. I will be, I promised." "We both will." As Connor and I ran through the shower of rice toward our waiting car, I realized the envelope with the letters was still in my clutch. For a moment, I considered turning back, giving them to my mother before we left. But something told me the timing wasn't right. Those letters had waited 30 years. They could wait 2 more weeks. The Maldives were everything the travel brochures promised: crystal clear waters, white sand beaches, and absolute privacy. For the first few days, Connor and I lost ourselves in newlywed bliss, ignoring the outside world and the family drama we'd left behind. But on our 4th night, as we sipped cocktails on the deck of our overwater bungalow, I found myself thinking about the letters in my suitcase. "You're miles away," Connor observed, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "What's on your mind?" The letters, I admitted. "I can't stop wondering what's in them." Connor set down his glass. "Are you thinking about reading them?" "I don't know," I said, conflicted. "They're addressed to your father, not to me. But they're from my mother about a time in her life that affects me directly." I looked out at the moonlit ocean. "What would you do?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I'd probably read them. But I'd also tell my mother about them as soon as possible." "You think I should call her? I think secrets have done enough damage to our families," Connor replied. "Whatever is in those letters, it's part of a story that's already affected all of us. Maybe knowing the full truth is the only way forward." That night after Connor fell asleep, I sat on the deck with the packet of letters. My hands trembled as I removed the first one, dated 2 weeks after my mother had left Boston. The envelope was yellowed with age, but the seal was intact. I broke it carefully and unfolded the thin paper inside. "Harold, it's been 2 weeks since I left and still no word from you. Your brother said you needed space, but I never thought that meant complete silence. Was it all a lie? The 2 years we spent together, the promises we made? I keep thinking about our last night together, how normal everything seemed. You kissed me goodbye after dinner with your parents, told me you'd see me at the altar. What changed in those 12 hours? Please, if you ever loved me at all, just tell me why." Diana. The letter was heartbreaking in its simplicity, a young woman desperately seeking answers. I opened the second, dated a week later. "Harold, your silence is answer enough, I suppose. Your parents got what they wanted. I hope whatever they promised you in exchange for breaking my heart was worth it. I won't be contacting you again after this, not because I don't deserve answers, but because I deserve better than someone who couldn't even face me to end things." Diana, but despite her promise, there were 10 more letters. The third made my breath catch. "Harold, I don't know why I'm writing when you clearly don't care enough to respond, but there's something you should know. I'm pregnant. 8 weeks along with your child. I'm not telling you this to trap you or force you back. I'm telling you because you deserve to know you're going to be a father, and this baby deserves to know who its father is, even if he's a coward. I'll be staying with my aunt in Pennsylvania until I figure out what to do next. If you want to be part of this child's life, you know how to reach me. Diana, tears streamed down my face as I read the fourth letter dated 3 weeks later. Harold, I lost the baby yesterday. The doctor said it happens sometimes, especially in early pregnancy, but I know it was the stress. The heartbreak. My body couldn't hold on to our child while my heart was breaking. I thought you should know. It's the last thing we'll ever share. Diana, the remaining letters documented my mother's grief, her anger, and finally her acceptance. The last one, dated exactly 3 months after she'd left Boston, was different from the others. Harold, this is the last letter I'll write. Not because I've forgiven you, I haven't, but because holding on to this anger is preventing me from moving forward. I met someone. His name is James. He's kind and honest and looks at me like I'm the most precious thing in his world. He knows about you, about the baby we lost. He held me while I cried over a man who didn't deserve my tears. I don't know if we have a future together, but for the first time since you broke my heart, I can imagine one. A future where I'm not defined by being the woman you abandoned. So this is goodbye, Harold. I hope whatever you gained by choosing your family's expectations over our love brings you happiness. I'm going to find mine elsewhere. Diana, I sat with the letters scattered around me until dawn began to break over the ocean. Connor found me there, tear-stained and exhausted. You read them, he said softly, sitting beside me. I nodded, gathering the letters together. My mother deserves to know that your father never read these, that he never knew about the baby until she told him at that dinner before our wedding. Does it change anything? Connor asked. Knowing what she wrote, it changes how I see her, I admitted. She was so young, so hurt, but she found the strength to move on to build a life with my father. I looked up at Connor. And if she hadn't, we might never have met. He took my hand. Sometimes, good things come from terrible situations. There's something else, I said, hesitantly. The last letter. My mother mentioned meeting my father just 3 months after leaving Boston. That's earlier than she's ever told me. She always said they met 6 months later. Maybe she was trying to protect your father's feelings, Connor suggested. Make it seem like there was more space between relationships. I thought about the timeline. Or maybe she was protecting me. If they met only 3 months after she left Boston, and I was born a year later, I trailed off a new possibility forming in my mind. Connor looked alarmed. Brinley, what are you thinking? Nothing, I said quickly. Just trying to piece together the timeline. But inwardly, I was calculating dates, wondering if there was yet another secret hidden in my family's past. When we returned from our honeymoon, I invited my mother to lunch, bringing the letters with me. We sat at a quiet table in her favorite restaurant as I placed the packet before her. What's this? She asked, not reaching for it. Letters you wrote to Harold Reynolds 30 years ago, I said gently. Connor found them in his father's study. They were never opened. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. He never read them. No, I confirmed. Not until I did on our honeymoon. Her eyes widened. You read them, all of them. I'm sorry, I said. I know they weren't meant for me. But after everything that happened before the wedding, I needed to understand. I reached for her hand. Mom, why did you tell me you met Dad 6 months after leaving Boston when it was really 3? She withdrew her hand, suddenly looking every one of her 58 years. You calculated the dates. I did, I acknowledged. And I'm confused. If you met Dad 3 months after leaving Boston, and I was born a year after that, you're wondering if Harold could be your father. She finished, her voice flat. The thought crossed my mind, I admitted. The timing is irrelevant, my mother said firmly. James Armstrong is your father, Brinley, in every way that matters. But biologically, I pressed. She sighed deeply, reaching for the packet of letters, but not opening it. Biologically, yes. James is your father. I was completely honest in those letters. I lost the baby I was carrying. Harold's baby. She paused, gathering herself. What I didn't write was that the doctors told me there might be complications if I tried to conceive again too quickly. They recommended waiting at least 6 months. But you didn't, I guessed. No, she admitted. I fell in love with your father very quickly. He was everything Harold wasn't: steady, honest, brave. We weren't careful, and 3 months after we met, I was pregnant with you. Her eyes filled with tears. The pregnancy was difficult. The doctors were concerned. But your father never left my side, not for a moment. Relief washed over me. So I'm definitely not. You are James Armstrong's daughter, my mother stated firmly. Blood, bone, and spirit. She finally opened the packet, extracting the letters with trembling fingers. I can't believe Harold kept these all these years. And never read them. I think he was afraid, I said. Afraid of facing what he'd done to you. My mother nodded slowly. That sounds like Harold. Always taking the easy way out. She looked at me with sudden concern. Does this change how you feel about Connor? About the wedding? No, I said immediately. Connor is nothing like his father. He's proven that over and over. I hesitated, but I think we both feel differently about Harold now. Knowing he kept your letters but was too cowardly to read them, it's hard to respect him. My mother gathered the letters and tucked them into her purse. Thank you for giving these to me. I think I need to have one final conversation with Harold. Are you sure that's a good idea? I asked, worried. It's necessary, she replied with quiet certainty. 30 years is long enough to leave things unsaid. 1 month after our return from the honeymoon, both families gathered at my parents' home for a Sunday dinner that my mother had insisted on hosting. Connor and I arrived early to help with preparations, finding my mother unusually serene as she arranged flowers in the dining room. Are you sure about this? I asked her for the 100th time. Having everyone here after everything that's happened, she smiled, adjusting a lily in the centerpiece. Very sure. It's time to close this chapter properly. When Harold and Elaine arrived, the initial greetings were stiff but civil. My father, ever the gracious host, offered drinks and led everyone to the patio where appetizers were set out. As the evening progressed, the conversation flowed more naturally, touching on safe topics like Connor's and my new home, my father's upcoming retirement, and Elaine's charity work. After dinner, as we moved to the living room for coffee, my mother cleared her throat. Before dessert, I'd like to say something. The room fell silent as she stood composed and elegant. Harold, I want to thank you for keeping my letters all these years, even if you never read them. Harold paled visibly. Diana, she held up a hand. Please let me finish. 30 years ago, I left Boston heartbroken and pregnant with your child. A child I lost because of the stress of your abandonment. Elaine gasped softly, reaching for her husband's hand. I wrote to you about it, my mother continued, about all of it. But you never knew because you were too afraid to open the letters. Too afraid to face the consequences of your actions. She smoothed her skirt. For years, I carried that pain, that anger. I let it color my reaction when Brinley brought Connor home. I nearly let it ruin our children's happiness. My father moved to stand beside her, his hand at the small of her back in silent support. But something changed during the wedding preparations. My mother continued. I saw in Connor everything you could have been, Harold, if you'd had the courage to choose love over expectation. And I realized that your cowardice 30 years ago led me to the greatest blessing of my life. She looked at my father with such love that my heart ached. James, the man who has loved me and our daughter unconditionally for 30 years. Harold looked down, unable to meet her gaze. So, this dinner isn't about reopening old wounds, my mother clarified. It's about finally closing them. About acknowledging that sometimes what feels like the worst moment of your life can lead you exactly where you're meant to be. She raised her glass. To new beginnings built on honest endings. As everyone drank to her toast, I noticed something I'd never seen before, a flash of envy in Harold's eyes as he watched my parents together. Not jealousy of my father for having my mother, but something deeper envy of their authentic connection, their hard-won happiness. Later, as Connor and I were leaving, Harold approached us in the driveway. "Brinley," he said hesitantly, "I want to apologize. Not just for the past with your mother, but for how it affected you and Connor." "It's not me you need to apologize to," I replied. "It's my mother." "I've tried," he admitted, "many times since the wedding." "But how do you apologize for changing the course of someone's life? Maybe you don't." Connor interjected his arm around my waist. "Maybe you just acknowledge it and try to do better going forward." Harold nodded slowly. "Your mother is an extraordinary woman, Brinley. She found the strength to forgive me when I couldn't even forgive myself." He looked at his son with newfound respect. "And you, Connor, are twice the man I was at your age. You had the courage to stand by Brinley despite all the family complications. I'm proud of you." As we drove home that night, Connor was unusually quiet. "What are you thinking about?" I asked, reaching for his hand across the console. "Something my father said," he replied. "About your mother finding the strength to forgive him. Do you think she really has Connor considered this?" "I think she's found something better than forgiveness. She's found peace with how her life turned out, despite what he did." He squeezed my hand. "And in the end, isn't that the best revenge? Living well, being happy while he spent 30 years knowing he made the biggest mistake of his life." 6 months later, we hosted Christmas at our new home, the one we'd purchased. With help from Harold's wedding gift and my parents' generosity, both families came the tension of the past now faded into something resembling genuine warmth. As we exchanged gifts around the tree, my mother handed Harold a small wrapped package. "What's this?" he asked, clearly surprised. "Something you should have had 30 years ago," she replied. He opened it slowly to reveal a framed ultrasound image yellowed with age, but still clearly showing the outline of a tiny form. "Our child," my mother said softly. "I had it in my keepsake box all these years. I thought you should finally have it." Harold stared at the image, tears streaming down his face. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "It's not about deserving," my mother told him, my father's arm around her shoulders. "It's about healing. For all of us." Later that evening, as our families departed, and Connor and I stood waving from our front porch, I realized that the tangled web of secrets, resentment, and regret that had nearly torn us apart had transformed into something unexpected, a complex, imperfect, but genuine family connection. The wounds of the past hadn't disappeared, but they had finally scarred over, allowing new growth to flourish. That night, as Connor and I lay in bed, his hand resting gently on my still flat stomach, where our own child was just beginning to grow, I thought about the long arc of family history, how one moment of weakness, one cowardly choice had set in motion a chain of events that led ultimately to love, not despite the pain, but somehow impossibly because of it. You know what they say, life has a way of coming full circle. The story I just shared with you is proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about finding peace and happiness despite the wrongs done to you. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you experienced a family secret that eventually led to healing? What life lessons have you learned from difficult family situations? Please like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe for more stories about family dynamics and personal growth, and share with anyone who might need to hear that pain doesn't have to define your future. Thank you so much for watching my family's journey from betrayal to healing, and I wish you all the strength to find your own path to peace, no matter what challenges you're facing.